Welcome to the Remedyforce Winter 18 Early Access Program. My name is Virginia Leandro, and I'm one of the product managers for Remedyforce. In this video, we want to introduce you to a beta feature called Skip Trigger Execution to hopefully help with SOCL 101 errors, especially if you use processes and Process Builder. This is our legal notice letting you know that what we are demoing today is regarding a future product. This information is provided under NDA and safe harbor statements apply. Any purchasing decision should be based on what is generally available today. With the introduction of Salesforce Process Builder, customers have noticed an increasing incidences of the dreaded SOCL 101 errors. Unlike workflows, when processes run, the queries and updates cause multiple executions of triggers. There are a lot of moving parts that have to run in the background to ensure that the changes don't impact Remedyforce due date or service level agreements. We've worked really hard to reduce the number of SOCL calls our triggers make, but we wanted to see if we could do better and give you the option of bypassing our triggers altogether. In Winter 18, we are introducing a new object field called Skip RF Trigger Execution. This is a custom field of data type checkbox. This feature, which will be in beta for Winter 18, can be applied to incident, task, or change requests. The idea is that if a process is updating a record and you are sure that the updates have nothing to do with calculations of due date, service level agreements, or applying templates, then setting the skip RF trigger execution to true will let our code skip the redundancy of running those checks with the hope of reducing instances of SOCL 101 errors. This is a bit of an eye chart, but it walks you through exactly how we are using the skip RF trigger execution. We have a variable to control the trigger execution, and another variable holds the trigger execution count. So when a process is fired, we initialize the two static variables. One controls the trigger execution based on the skip RF trigger execution setting, and the other variable holds the trigger execution count. As the code execution enters the before trigger, we check to see if skip RF trigger execution is set to true as part of the changes from the process. If it's not set to true, then we execute the before and after trigger logic, all the while keeping track of how many times our trigger is run. If the skip RF trigger execution is set to true in the process, then we set the flag in the record back to false, configure the variable, and bypass running any code in the before or after trigger. At the end, we reset the internal variables so we can continue to set up for the next run of when a process or processes are triggered. So what does all this mean in layman's terms? Well, a record gets created or updated. The processes are run, and if skip RF trigger execution is not set, then we process our triggers normally. However, if it is true, we skip our before and after triggers. We've created a scenario where we can duplicate the problem, and we'll show you how this works. To set this up, we have a service level agreement that is associated with the record when the impact and urgency are high. We also have a template that sets urgency, impact, description, and account. A record is created with a category of email, causing the workflow to fire and apply the template, which in turn updates the fields. Impact and urgency are high, so the first process fires and updates the record status to in progress. The record's account is set to Acme, so the second process fires, setting the service field of the record. Finally, with the status set to in progress and the account set to Acme, we update the incident description. Each of these processes are causing additional SOCL calls to query the data. These together should cause us to get an error. We already have the workflows and processes we referred to earlier set up and configured in this particular org. I also have debug logs running in a separate browser. So let's submit a ticket with a category email and a brief description. Notice we get the error. An error occurred while saving the record. Switching over to debug log, we can see that we've gotten the too many SOCL queries 101 error. This is where our new setting comes into play. Here's my second process, and since this is actually active, I'll deactivate the process and clone it into a new version. Now I'll go to Actions, and I'm going to add an additional row, and I'm going to type skip for the skip RF trigger execution. This is Boolean, and I want to set it to true, and I'll go ahead and save the process and make sure I activate it. Now let's try submitting the record again. Notice this time our record was successfully submitted, and if I jump over to Remedyforce console, we'll see the newly created record, and you'll see it's happily sitting here with the template being applied, the impact and urgency set to high, the Acme account having been configured, the status is in progress, and we have the service that was set as well. So the rule of thumb should or can be that if you have a process from Process Builder that is updating object fields that have nothing to do with application of SLAs, setting priority, impacting or driving due date calculation, or the application of templates, then the skip trigger execution field can be set to true and reduce the number of SOCL queries. We'll also have additional documentation around the fields that are involved in the Remedyforce internal processes so you can better understand the boundaries. Some final thoughts. Keep in mind and be aware that this is beta. There may be scenarios or use cases where the setting cannot be applied or is a use case we haven't seen. Always test in a sandbox first before implementing and monitoring in production. The feature only applies if you are using strictly processes from Process Builder or a mix of both workflows and processes. In a mixed environment, this setting is always set through processes and not through workflows. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to your feedback on the Remedyforce Winter 18 release.